Welcome to Sunday Punch with Kelly and Radio Rahim. We're based here in Louisville, Kentucky, while Rahim is in Los Angeles, Hollywood, California. Louisville, Kentucky is the home to 4 heavyweight champions in Marvin Hart, Jimmy Ellis, Greg Page, and, of course, the greatest, Muhammad Ali. Our audience has been requesting a boxing show for quite some time, and we are bringing that to you. We're going to discuss the big fights, the big fighters, and all the top stories. We have access to Max Boxing's Radio Rahim's pre- and post-fight interviews, which will lead to some great discussion. A great way to find the interviews is to do a Facebook search for first name, Radio Rahim, and the last name is Max Boxing. Interviews ranging from Mike Tyson to Floyd Mayweather and everywhere in between. So we will be using the clips during our show. If you want to see the videos and the interviews in entirety, check it out through Radio Rahim's Facebook profile. Last night we had a great fight, a couple undefeated young fighters, the 22-year-old Saul Canelo Alvarez against the 26-year-old Austin Trout, the American. Great matchup on Showtime. I sat around, I watched it with some of my buddies at my friend's apartment. I thought it was a great show. Obviously, one of the fighters had to leave victorious, the other with now a blemished record. I thought Saul Canelo Alvarez was the bigger and the stronger fighter last night. Austin Trout hung in there and had some impressive runs, but overall I think it was judged accurately, and I think Austin Trout lost the fight. He handled it very well. I think it was a great fight. As far as not being a pay-per-view event, I would argue this is about as good of a value as you will get for a boxing match that is not on pay-per-view. What was your take from the fight, Rahim?
First of all, it was exciting. The matchup was as good as the promotion had claimed it would be. So I think boxing fans can be satisfied that that night was not spent in vain. I was enthralled with the fight from the first round to the last bell. These guys came in. I think they gave their all. They both came in with a game plan, a strategy that was capable of winning, and I do agree with you to the extent that Saul Alvarez should have gotten the decision, with the caveat that I don't agree with the judges' scorecards. Now, many boxing heads already know what I mean by that, but some may not realize the differential between, well, if you agree with the decision, how can you not agree with the judges' scorecards? Well, obviously, when they have a 10-point must system, then every round is scored, and the way that especially one judge who had the fight 118 to 109, it indicates that he gave almost every round to Saul Canelo Alvarez. I do not agree with that, but an interesting aspect of this judging, fortunately being ultimately correct, we had a unanimous decision. I think the right guy won, so we can all rest easy on that, but it does highlight, again, the vast differential between the way the judges see the fight at ringside and way most of the fans see the fight at home, and some even in the arena are perplexed at how they come up with these scores. And the one thing that was different in this fight than has been in most fights, it's not the first time it's ever been done, but it was done here, and it is not done very frequently, is the open scoring. And what that means is that during the fight, each corner can actually keep track of the way this fight is being scored. So that is highly unusual in boxing. Usually part of the anticipation of reading off the scorecard, well, the major aspect of the anticipation is that you don't know how the judges have scored. Everyone's comparing notes at the end of the fight, who I've got, who you've got, how many rounds. You know, that aspect is totally stripped from the fight when you have open scoring, because, like I said, during the fight, the corner and the broadcast is making the fans at home aware of how the judges are scoring all throughout the boxing match. So the question then becomes, how does that affect the fight? How does that affect the strategy of the fighters? Does it affect the way with which they take chances? Are they as aggressive as they would otherwise be if they didn't know where they were on the scorecard? Does it make the fan at home more comfortable with the scoring, knowing each round where the judges are? And then it's easier to critique the judges because immediately you're like, hey, how's the score here? And I've got my score there. Unfortunately, there still is no reprise. There's still no way that you can affect a scorecard that you disagree with, but at least during the fight, you know where the fighters are. I will give you an example at the post-fight of how Austin Trout responded to this very question. Does it affect you as a fighter when you know what the judges are scoring the fight before the final bell sounds? Check out this clip.
Where you guys knew the scores after, I believe, the 4th and 8th. Do you wish that wasn't a part of this fight, and did it alter the game plan or the fight adversely in any way?
You know, I felt like we were behind. You know, I'm a big critic of myself more than anything, so usually even if I was winning or was closer, I would still think I'm losing. You know, the crowd cheered for everything. I wanted to shut them up, so I wanted to step on the gas. And I wouldn't say I wish that it didn't happen. You know, it happened, so it was meant to be.
Couple things to take away from that. You know, obviously Austin Trout handled the loss very impressively. He did acknowledge that the scoring, you know, it lets him know that he was behind during the fight, so he should have been pressing later in the fight. He said, you know, I basically, I always am critical on myself, and I pretty much handle it the same way regardless as if I'm losing throughout the whole fight. The important thing, in my opinion, is the right fighter won that fight. I think Saul Canelo Alvarez is a true star. I heard Jim Gray baited him into speaking a little bit of English, which I was impressed with. I think Alvarez has some great crossover appeal. I've already seen him in many, or at least a couple, national commercials. I think the true story from the fight last night is the birth of a superstar with Saul Canelo Alvarez. But regarding the scoring and the way it impacts the fight, it sounds like Austin Trout really considers himself the underdog throughout regardless.
All right, Kelly, let me address the aspect of the fight that you initially went with as far as the contrasting of styles and how the fight was just scored. I don't mean to lay on this topic of how I have a discrepancy between the right man winning and the right score being made. I didn't have the fight nearly as wide a margin as 118 to 109. I think that's absurd. And I also think that it made Trout know that he needed a knockout after the 10th, when on my card, all he needed was a knockdown. Now, that may seem like a splitting of hairs, but it puts a different mentality in the fighter. It makes him take chances. It makes him do things that I think he would otherwise not do, and I think that he put himself in harm's way in the final 3 rounds and took some shots that he didn't have to take had this fight been scored properly. What I was most impressed with this fight was the head movement and the much improved defense of Saul Canelo Alvarez. I did not expect Saul to have that kind of defense. His head movement has never been that good. He was very skilled in not only his defense, but also resting throughout the fight. Now, I have a trainer in my own right. Granted, I am nowhere near a professional fighter by any means, but I do train in the gym, and I've got a trainer who tells me you got to learn to rest in the ring. Well, I haven't seen a fighter rest in the ring and really have the proper conditioning and game plan to get through a 12-round fight that was a faster pace than he's comfortable with than I'd seen with this Saul Canelo Alvarez performance. He did excellent with that. And to be honest, I thought before the fight, I called it with my, close circle of personal friends. I never make public predictions, but I had Trout as the winner. I thought Trout was going to be victorious because of the lack of defense that I'd seen in Canelo Alvarez previously. I didn't think his head movement was going to be nearly as precise. I didn't think that he was going to be, if the fight was at the pace that it ultimately ended up being, because Trout pressed the action. Trout stayed busy for 12 rounds. Kudos to him for that. I didn't think that Saul was going to be able to keep that pace and have a proper defense to shield him for 12 rounds. He proved me wrong. And that, I think, when your assessment of a superstar being born, to that end, we've seen a superstar being born because we've seen a man learn in the ring. We've seen it. We're actually watching a talent develop. And I have to give all the kudos in the world to Saul Canelo Alvarez for taking that next step in developing his talent and becoming a full-fledged, well-rounded fighter. Now, when a star is born, is the starlight or the sunlight infinite? Is there enough room in this boxing world to have more than 1 or 2 or 3 stars shining at the same time? I ask that because what is, I think, unfortunate about the way our sport is assessed and the way that promoters match up fights is that this is a unification bout. This is 2 undefeated fighters facing each other and putting it all on the line for one night. In a performance like we saw from Austin Trout, and him being bested by a star with the talent of Canelo Alvarez, we shouldn't now have to suffer through, with Trout, a rebuilding of his entire career. This should not knock Trout down to the bottom rung of the ladder because he's lost to a world champion, unified title holder now, who came and faced him as an undefeated fighter, who is himself an undefeated fighter. Somebody's O had to go, but that shouldn't mean that the guy who's now got 1 loss to an equally talented and on the night a better talented fighter should now have to go back to the drawing board, not only with his ring savvy and his design and strategy for fights, but also for his entire career. I think that is a blemish that boxing has to also be mindful of not allowing to become or to continue to be a part of our sport. Like, show respect to the fighters that are willing to put a undefeated record on the line against another undefeated fighter. And if it's a fight that's equivalent to their talent and they're not the best man on that night, that doesn't mean they're the worst guy in boxing all of a sudden. And this clip, you'll see Trout with the premonition talking about knowing how our fight game, is set up. You'll see him talk about what will happen, and he's correct, if this fight goes the other way.
After this, if we're not victorious, they're not going to let me back in. I'm going to have to go back to doing what I had to do to get here all over again. So, we don't want to do that.
My take is that generationally, we have Floyd Mayweather, Manny Pacquiao, the big superstars, the household names. This fight really matched up 2 of the candidates for the future of that superstar status and that crossover appeal. The fact that one of them had to leave with a loss on his record is almost unfortunate, but it's a part of the game. Looking back over Manny Pacquiao's career, 2005, he lost a unanimous decision to Eric Morales. You could maybe draw a reference or compare the 2 from Austin Trout. He still has plenty of time left. He's a 26-year-old young guy. The fact that he lost, I agree with you completely, doesn't mean that he's not a great fighter. Doesn't mean that he doesn't have a lot of potential ahead of him. And who knows, he may end up being the better fighter with the better resume when it's all said and done when comparing him and Saul Canelo Alvarez. It's still very early. I think the birth of a superstar with Saul Canelo Alvarez within the Mexican fan base is the true story here. And he's walking away from it with his continued undefeated record, whereas Trout, he's almost, I won't say back to the drawing board, but I don't think there's going to be a rematch. Where does he go from here?
Well, you're certainly right. I don't think there's going to be a rematch either. But I don't think that he has to go back again to the drawing board for his entire career. I think, hey, I faced a guy that I thought I should be able to beat. The guy came in with weapons I wasn't expecting him to have. He bested me on the night. Let me figure out how to make sure that no one can take the weapons away from me that I am currently proficient with, and how I can adjust so that if I see a fighter who comes in with the weapons that Canelo showed last night, that I will be able to best him next time, or best at least another fighter who comes with that game plan. Because now that he's lost, Austin Trout, fighters are going to learn from Canelo Alvarez's game plan. No question. That's just a part of any sport. So he's definitely got to go back to the drawing board and figure out how not to be beat that way again. But he shouldn't have to be, facing much lesser competition now because a fighter of Canelo's talent and with a fighter that was able to execute a proper game plan at that level was able to beat him, and now he's all of a sudden got to fight guys at a much lesser level on, ESPN, which is no disrespect to ESPN, but those fights are not at the level of an HBO or a Showtime. We've got to respect men that are in this sport that are willing to put their O's on the line, that are willing to take challenges. And the way that we respect them is to not punish them for losing when they've given a valiant effort, not over punishing them. I'd like to see Trout still in against the elite top upper echelon of fighters at 154. He's earned that. This loss does not diminish that. And I think the fans ultimately have to be mindful of not going along with the perception that one loss means you're a waste of your life and now you can't beat anybody. That's totally untrue. And there is also a very unfair tendency that promoters have to their favorite horse, if you will. And obviously fighters aren't horses, but excuse the analogy, they're favorite sons, let's say. The guys that are on a path like Canelo Alvarez, who have been a favorite son of their promotional company from the beginning, honestly, had Alvarez lost that fight, and here's a great example, he had a rematch clause. He was coming in as the challenger. He had a rematch clause so that if he had lost that fight, he had the option of forcing Austin Trout to give him another fight. So essentially, Austin Trout would have had to beat Canelo twice just to keep his belt. I think that is an example of the unfair way in which these matchups and these contracts are determined. That shouldn't be the case. And it's the case because they don't want their star, their favorite son, to have to go back to the drawing board and not have an opportunity to avenge any loss and wipe that blemish from his record immediately. Those are the small things that happen in contracts that oftentimes the casual fan is not aware of that disadvantage one fighter over another. And I don't think Austin Trout deserved that disrespect. I'm sure that was absolutely a stipulation of him getting the fight in the first place, and they probably wouldn't have taken the fight, being Alvarez wouldn't have taken the fight if that clause wasn't in the contract. And, for my money, I think that's bull. Like, that is absolutely out of line. And if anyone should have a rematch clause, it should be the title holder, the guy who's coming in the ring and putting his belts on the line. If anyone deserves an option to force the other guy to fight him again, it should be the title holder. So with that said, we're looking now down the line for Canelo Alvarez. What's next? This guy put on a phenomenal performance. As you say, a star was born. Well, a star is now shining. I think he's answered a lot of critics. He certainly answered my criticism. So we all know that he's been calling out Floyd Mayweather for a couple of years now. There was a time when even Oscar De La Hoya said he wasn't ready, but Oscar's changed his tune. And I'm going to give you an opportunity to hear Oscar's new theory on whether or not Canelo Alvarez is ready for Floyd Money Mayweather.
Are we going to see a Canelo Alvarez Mayweather fight happen? I hope so, and I feel it will happen. Mayweather understands that he's at the tail end of his career. Okay, he has maybe less than 10 fights to go, so he knows in order to make the big money, in order to secure his legacy, in order to solidify of being the best, he has to continue fighting the best. So are we going to see a fight with him and Canelo? Absolutely. I mean, that's who Mayweather is. So I'm excited by that. It's very exciting.
So you're confident that fight will be made? You think it can be made this year?
I'm very confident because, absolutely, very confident because they are fighters. And that's what fighters do.
Now,
so what we have now is, we've got the Austin Trout versus Saul Canelo Alvarez fight out of the way. The attention of the sports world now shifts to the young Mexican fighter, to the 22-year-old, setting his sights on, hopefully, the 36-year-old undefeated American fighter, Floyd Mayweather. Everybody would want it. I think it's an opportunity for a couple different things, depending on the way that the fight would go if it were to happen in September of this year. If Floyd were to win, I think it would ultimately really cement his legacy, and it'll say he went out. If he were to retire after that, which actually he wouldn't do that. He's still got however many fights left on his contract, but he would cement his legacy as arguably one of the greatest fighters ever. If he were to lose, I think it could represent a real changing of the guard for Saul Canelo Alvarez for many years.
You know, I agree to the extent that there is definitely a fervor out there for this fight to be made. I have interviewed Oscar several times, and the answer to my question that you just heard is one of the favorite answers that I've gotten in an interview with essentially anybody. I love the fact that he said this: that's what fighters do. I couldn't agree more. What we saw last night is what fighters do. Two undefeated guys putting their careers on the line, their O's on the line, all the belts on the line to unify a world title at 154, winner take all. There is nothing more exemplary of what fighters do than that. Floyd Mayweather is already one of the greatest of all time. That legacy is cemented. Now we have to determine in the last 6 fights of his career, can he make a case for being the greatest of all time, bar none? That legacy has not yet been cemented. And I think Floyd himself, when he's quiet alone in his home with his own thoughts, would have to admit that that has not yet been cemented. And to do so, he's got to fight the 6 best fights with the 6 best fighters of his career. He's got to go out there and challenge not just the young and the talented, but the title-holding established, and do it in a fashion that no other fighter in history has done. Go out on the top of his game, undefeated, having said that he has faced the best at their best in their prime and walked away from the sport still pretty. That, to me, would cement his legacy as the best ever. He could do it.
The question,
when I see, here's the thing, when you see these promotions that are going to be made over the next couple weeks for Guerrero Mayweather, which is a huge fight, which is a legitimate fight. I don't think that Guerrero is a lesser opponent or Guerrero is a cherry-picked opponent. I think that that's a tough fight and that Guerrero deserves the shot that he's gotten. So I take nothing from Floyd Mayweather for having selected that opponent. But he also has to expect that now that Canelo has put on this performance and this fight has been called for at least 2 years by Canelo, and maybe in the last year more so by the boxing fans, that he's going to be asked, are you ready for Canelo? You remember that Canelo tried to instill a clause in his appearance on the Floyd Mayweather pay-per-view undercard as it was originally designed for Canelo Alvarez and Austin Trout to have the fight we saw last night on May 4th on the undercard of Guerrero Mayweather, and he insisted that if he was going to appear on the card, that he would have the next fight with Floyd Mayweather no matter what. Basically, he tried to box Floyd in and force him to sign on the dotted line saying, I will fight Canelo Alvarez next. Floyd refused, and Canelo was not bluffing, so he refused to be on the card, and that's why we saw this fight last night, and we're not still waiting for it 2 weeks from now. So when Floyd is asked about Canelo Alvarez, it'll be interesting to see if he bristles at the suggestion. Now he's going to, I think, in my experience, he'll most likely say, well, I'm here, I'm focused on Guerrero, I'm talking about this fight, I'm promoting this fight, I don't want to talk about Saul, but it's incumbent upon those of us who represent the questions of the fans, who represent the people who want to know the answers to these questions, to at the very least ask them. That's what we're here for. The people who are watching this show, a vast majority of them do not have the opportunity to stand next to a Floyd Mayweather, to stand next to a Saul Canelo Alvarez, to ask them the questions that they'd like answers to. So when that's done, the way the fighter responds, the way the promoter responds, the way the publicists respond, all create an atmosphere as to whether or not the fans can get the answers to the questions that they have. And I'm going to give you an example of, in my career, how I've taken it upon myself, because I truly believe the only reason that I am viable, existing, or at all successful to whatever degree that I have success in this sport is because the fans, some of them, appreciate what I do. So when I have the opportunity to talk to a fighter, to talk to a promoter, regardless of who it is, or how big a star they are, or how much they don't want to answer a question that I think deserves to be asked, I ask it anyway, because that is what I see as my job. I'll give you a few examples here. We're going to start with Bob Arum, who is one of the two biggest promoters in the sport, and at a time was the biggest promoter. This guy has, wields all the power that you could ask for one guy in a monopoly of a sport, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have to answer tough questions or respond to tough criticism. Here, listen to how I pose a question to Bob Arum, CEO of Top Rank.
I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but this morning on the Jim Rome show, he called you a scumbag promoter, saying that you never give back to the sport and you just take. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, I don't know where Dana is coming from. I never said anything bad about him. But, Dana has to realize that because
now,
of the monopoly
Kelly,
of the UFC.
Series of clips to show you how in that instance, I wasn't calling Bob Arum a scumbag, but people were. And I thought that he should have to respond to that, because not only, it's not just name calling, how you just off the cuff called the guy a scumbag. I don't think I would have likely asked that question, but he had prefaced it with saying how he treats his fighters, how much money they make in relation to how much money is being made off of their fights. So I thought that that was a reasonable question to ask him, and it shouldn't have been sugar-coated or watered down for his palate. You take it as it's being delivered out there in the world and respond in whichever fashion you see appropriate. I don't play any type of favorites. I don't think that in a reporting field you have the option to play favorites, because you do a disservice not only to your field, but to those who tune in and support and watch you and depend on you to be impartial and deal evenly with every fighter, every promoter that you encounter. The famed Manny Pacquiao, who is no lesser a star than Floyd Mayweather, who happens to be on the promotional company owned by Bob Arum, Top Rank. I like Manny personally. As a matter of fact, there are no fighters that I don't like personally. But that doesn't mean that I don't ask even the fighters that I like personally tough questions. Here's Manny Pacquiao.
Yes.
Now, you say you want to give the fans what they want. A lot of these fans want Marquez. What made Shane the choice over Marquez? Are you ducking him?
Well, that's, it depends on what's the choice.
Now, look, when I asked that question, at that time, he was preparing for Shane Mosley. The fans were like, why Shane? He's old. He's past it. This is ridiculous. They really didn't like that matchup. And it was before Pacquiao Marquez 3. And so we'd only had 2 fights at that time. And the fans, to a great proportion, were calling for Pacquiao Marquez 3. So I had to ask the question, hey, are we seeing you in the ring against Shane Mosley because you're ducking Marquez? Well, that caused quite a stir. Manny didn't like that question. He didn't expect that question. Nobody else asked that question. But he responded to it in the fashion that he deemed reasonable, and I moved on. That's what we do. I give fighters an opportunity to respond to not only the accolades, and I do show them the proper respect and mention the accolades and congratulate them on excellent performances, but also the criticisms and the questions that still have been left unanswered because they're uncomfortable to ask. I'll give you another example. I don't have personal friends in boxing because I think to hang out with fighters and break bread with them as personal friends is a conflict of interest for what I do. But I will say again that I I like every single fighter that you've seen me interview. I have respect for. I have a certain affinity in one regard or another for them. I like Floyd Mayweather. I like him, personally. He's a personable guy. When you're in his company, he's very charming. It's not the guy all the time that you see on 24/7 or All Access. He's a very charming individual, very charismatic, funny. So when Victor Ortiz headbutted him and took an L because Floyd, within the rules of boxing, hit him with, what they call the chicken dinner, the two-piece, after being headbutted, I didn't go in there and softball about what happened. I had to challenge Ortiz on what did we just see in the ring and how did this occur, knowing that it's well outside the rules of boxing. No one had challenged him at that point to that degree. And here's what happened. Here's how I put it.
Radio Rahim here with vicious Victor Ortiz. You're getting ready for the big rematch with Andre Berto, February 11th, MGM Grand. Now, Victor, there's no way we can talk without discussing what's happened in your previous fight, right? That's what's bringing you to this moment. In the previous fight, the first fight I'm talking about, you had everything on the line. It was redemption time. This may have been your last shot at glory, and you took the bull by the horns. You found that glory. You got up off the canvas and were victorious. You stepped in the ring with Floyd Mayweather and seemingly fell apart. It couldn't have been really a worse outcome for you. What I want to know is, what was the difference between the Victor Ortiz that got up off the canvas against Berto and the Victor Ortiz that lost it in the ring against Floyd Mayweather?
I didn't lose anything in the ring against Floyd Mayweather. I just figured, hey, Floyd's one of the best fighters of all time in people's eyes. So with that alone, he won't hit me with my hands down. So ref didn't call time in. I looked at the ref. Little do I know, Floyd hits me. I mean, that was beyond my power. I think personally I had him a little freaked out because I had him against the ropes and catching him, nailing him. He's never been nailed like that before. So, hey, at the end of the day, if you need to save yourself, you're going to do something.
You have a big fan base out there. Your story is ingratiating to people. So the reason I'm getting into this is because people want to know what makes you tick. They love you out there. But when you went with that headbutt, and that's what started the poor chain of events, my question simply is, what brought you outside of the framework of a boxing mentality into doing something that you knew could end the fight poorly?
I was trying to break his nose, 100%.
Rahim, my experience with press conferences and asking coaches and players questions is restricted to college basketball. Immediately after the game, the press sits behind a table where the players and coaches sit. They then field open questions. There's plenty of stories from Bobby Knight to most recently Jim Boeheim up in Syracuse, New York, where he was asked a question, what do you think of the fact that Rick Pitino has beaten you 6 times in a row? You see Jim Boeheim then kind of loses cool and react in a way that I find entertaining. A lot of people do, but it's restricted. My point is that college basketball and the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, those press conferences are they're a different animal than the sport of boxing. That brings me to a very interesting topic. I've heard Larry Merchant describe his love for the sport of boxing. And he describes it in a way that when he was a young kid, he fell in love with not just the boxers, but the guys who covered the sport of boxing. And the guys who really, I don't know the degree of the tough questions that were sent out at that time versus, softball type questions, but more so the guys who covered it and the guys who talked about it and asked those questions. Rahim, my question to you is, where does a good reporter who doesn't just ask the softball complimentary questions to the fighters and to the promoters, where does a reporter, what is the place of a reporter in the sport of boxing, which is much more of a free-for-all than college basketball or really any other sport? What is the importance to the fan and to the sport of boxing as a whole of reporters who will not just ask the softball questions, but will actually ask the questions the fans want to hear the answers to?
Well, I think we have plenty of examples out there to compare and contrast. You're right in the extent that boxing is more of a free-for-all. So you can go out online, go out and see the different styles that different reporters have. I'm not judging or trying to take away from what other guys do. You have to find your niche in this sport. You have to find your niche in this profession, I should say. And I've carved out a place for myself that I think is unique, and that the response to what I do has proven to be valuable. So you can be a softball guy. You can ask the awkward, weird, friendship questions. And to be honest with you, the way things are set up, that will probably carry you a hell of a lot more favor than is doled out on me. You'll probably get a longer interview, more access to the fighter. The fighter will be more friendly with you because they know that you're there to do a kind of job that they like. You're pretty much, if that's your approach, in my opinion, you're pretty much just an extension of the promoter. The promoter is going to love you because you're really just doing their job for them and masquerading and masking it as journalism. But by my definition, journalism is getting answers to unanswered questions, getting perspective from the individual who is the principal in a circumstance that anyone from the outside doesn't have. If that's a convoluted way of describing it, what I'm saying is only the fighter can tell you what was in their mind when they were in the ring, which is what I asked Victor Ortiz. Only the fighter himself. We can all speculate. We can all talk from our perches of professionalism and how many fights we've seen and how long we followed this guy, and we can pontificate on why he did this and why he did that and what he'll do next, but only he himself can tell you the truth. And that is my job, to find out the truth and deliver it to the fans who want to know. So, as in everyone's personal life, no matter what they do, they're not always interested in sharing the truth that is unflattering to themselves. So, if I have any calling, it's to get at that which they don't want to share, but needs to be known. That is what you saw exemplified in my question. It didn't come without consequence. Not to me. Victor Ortiz paid a consequence for answering that question honestly. But I will always have respect for him for having in that moment decided to tell me what was really on his mind. Don't give me the talking points. Don't give me the predetermined answer. Don't give me what you were prepped to say. I got a moment of truth, a moment of clarity with Victor Ortiz. And he had to go before the State Athletic Commission in Nevada and explain his intention with that headbutt and explain having the mindset of breaking a fighter's nose with an illegal maneuver. And it cost him hundreds of thousands or $100,000. It cost him his boxing license for a time. And to his credit, I've interviewed with him after that. Now, he may not have liked how the interview came out, and in the interim, he's tried to sidestep and walk back what he said. I don't fault him for any of that. I respect him for in that moment being honest. I think the fans deserve the truth. I think the fighters should have the integrity to tell the truth, and when they do, it's appreciated by everybody. Even if there's consequences, you gain my respect, and I think you gain the respect of the fans. Even those who didn't like the idea, I didn't like the idea of going in there and illegally headbutting somebody, trying to injure them in a fight, and could even be permanent. You're trying to break a guy's nose with a headbutt. That is totally unacceptable. In no way, and in no shape, form, or fashion can that be tolerated. But in that moment, he told me what he was really trying to do, what he was really on his mind, and he was honest. And for that, I will forever respect him. This is an uncomfortable relationship, oftentimes, that a true journalist has with a subject. And a mutual respect is all that can be asked for. And it is necessary for the journalist to show that respect to the subject, in my profession, to the fighter. And it's necessary for the fighter to show respect to the audience that the journalist represents. Most of you will know by now that in the previous few days, I traveled to Las Vegas for Media Day, setting up Floyd Mayweather against Robert Guerrero. The first media day was Robert Guerrero's. We went through that process as we always do. I asked Robert Guerrero a series of questions that were in my usual fashion. They were tough questions, challenging questions. He responded in a way that he deemed appropriate, and I moved on. The next day was Floyd Mayweather's media day. A media day is a day that is self-explanatory. It's a day that is designed for the fighters to address the media. That's what the entire purpose of the day is. This is a media workout day. So not only do they train for you, but they also give you access to answer questions about the upcoming fight, their camp. That's why it's often done close to the fight, because the fighter's at that point in condition. They're going to show you whatever they're going to show you. If it's some guys like Guerrero, he only did a few minutes of shadow boxing and called that a workout. Well, Floyd Mayweather went through his entire workout. He always does that, is incredibly generous, showing you how he hits the mitts, how he hits the bag, how he hits the speed bag, how he conditions, and it's phenomenal to watch. To watch this guy train is awe-inspiring. And in addition to going through all of that, which is an exhausting process for anybody, and the fact that it's not as exhausting for him as it would be for most people is a part of that awe inspired by watching it, he also addresses the media as a group and one-on-one. You take the questions asked and you answer them. You do one-on-one interviews with journalists that work in that capacity, and you answer the questions asked. That's what the entire purpose of the day is. So on that day, in quite an unusual display of anything, I can't call it anything but being blocked from being able to do my job, I was unable to attain an interview one-on-one with Floyd Mayweather, as everyone else, literally everyone else that requested that style interview got. Many people speculate now as to why that is the case. I don't know why that is the case. I don't have the ability to go inside a man's mind and determine why he's made the choices that he's made. But I will say this, and you can go on my Facebook page, Radio Rahim first name, Max Boxing last name, and see the video of me essentially not getting the interview, and you'll see at the very top of that video, the very first thing shown is him agreeing to do a one-on-one interview with me. He knows who I am. He saw me. I asked the question, couldn't, get a couple questions, and he said, yes, in the affirmative, follow me. So at that point, I did so, and what transpires after that, you can see from pulling up the video. It's available everywhere. You can always go to my Facebook page and find it right there. It had nothing to do with what had transpired earlier in the day, because what happened earlier in the day, a Roger Mayweather interview, had not yet been aired. That video was not out yet, and I have in no uncertain terms, that had nothing to do with what happened after I requested that interview, and he said he would give it to me, and I ultimately didn't get it. So I'm going to show you one last clip of an interaction that Floyd and I had before the media day denial, and I'm not showing you this as an example of why I didn't get the interview. Honestly, I don't know. And I don't think that Floyd himself can be determined to have been responsible for me not getting that interview. I say you look at the video and you can determine for yourself why I didn't get that interview, or speculate. And I'll be at Fight Week in just a couple of weeks from now, and I'll be looking for that interview again, and hopefully this time things will be different. But in this last clip, I'd like to show you the type of interaction that Floyd Mayweather and I have had in the past.
Hungry Miguel Cotto.
Now, you probably know this, that Pacquiao's talking about he's only got 2 more fights. One of them's already signed. He's ready to retire. If there is an opportunity at the end of his career, the last fight, just to put the money issue aside, winner take all, I know you're a gambling man. Would you fight winner take all, last fight against Manny Pacquiao?
Ring King
Now, that question I asked and Floyd answered it in a way that he deemed possible or deemed reasonable, and that was it. So if you want to find out the responses to any of these questions that I've shown in the clips leading up to now, again, you can find me on Facebook at Radio Rahim. First name, Max Boxing. Last name, they're out there. You can find out how these fighters responded. But this last series of clips that I've shown you is an example of what I believe my job to be. None of those questions were comfortable to ask. I'm not a gotcha guy. I'm not looking to embarrass a fighter. I'm not looking to sensationalize controversy. I'm simply looking to get at the truth. And that was the purpose of each and every one of those questions asked. And you can see, if you go back and watch those interviews, how the fighter, and in some cases a promoter, deemed reasonable to respond to those questions. And I let that be. That's what it is. You're either going to tell the truth or you're not. You're either going to be expansive and address the question asked, or you're not. And that's, in and of itself, its own truth. That's what I think is a fighter's, or is a journalist's job. That's what I think is my responsibility for the great gift I've been given of access. That is what I believe is my mission in this profession. To seek the truth, find it, and deliver it to the audience that does not have the access. I'll let you guys determine whether or not that's the kind of thing you want to see. If it's not, there's plenty of guys doing something else. But if the truth is what you seek, then my interviews are the ones that represent you.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in to Sunday Punch this week. You know, it's been another great episode. If you want to interact with either myself or Rahim, please, you can tweet at us. My Twitter is @TheKellyPatrick. If you want me to suggest a question I can ask Rahim, anything related to that. Rahim's Twitter handle is, Rahim, what is your Twitter handle?
@Radio Rahim TV.
Okay. Also, obviously, comment on the YouTube pages. We will be back next week with more Sunday Punch.